Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of our Let's Talk Arsenal series, our show in which I'm joined usually by a fair few guests to have a chat about the current state of Arsenal, all the topics surrounding it, and at the moment that, of course, is a lot to do with transfers. However, Edu's interview has kind of sent a few shockwaves through the fan base over the last 24 hours. Really interesting to hear some honest thoughts, some abrasive thoughts at times as well, and especially regarding the missing opportunities, or rather the missed opportunities that we've had this window, but also the aims and the ambitions that this club has going forwards and where it wants to take itself. Top four Champions League qualification is, to quote Edu, a consequence of what they're looking to do, which I quite like. But I'm going to get the thoughts of my guests this evening. So let's introduce you to them. First of all, it's Harry Symeou. How you doing, mate? You good, Joel?
All good, mate. All good. Can't complain. How are you?
Yeah, not bad indeed. Not bad at all. Weather is I mean, it's merciful now. It's not the temperatures that we had. I mean, even you were saying it was too hot, which is saying something.
The first couple of days, I was like, "Bring it on! I love this. Why are people complaining about it? It's beautiful." But then after you have a few nights of rubbish sleep and a few nights of feeling uncomfortable, you start to want it to go away.
Yeah, indeed. We moan about the weather way too much, but a man that never has to, of course, is our next guest this evening. It's Dr. Raj. How you doing, mate? You good, Joel?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, like you said, no weather complaints over here. So,
Indeed.
How about yourself? How you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good. Long day working, but it's interesting to start covering what we're going to talk about actually a lot today, which of course is the fallout from that interview. And welcome to everybody joining us in the chat box. We will shortly be joined by FK. I'm reliably informed that rush hour has hit his arrival time, but he will endeavour to join us throughout today's show. So if you've tuned in going, where the hell is FK? He should be here very soon.
You showed us a dream, Tom. You showed us a dream.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. The man from Latte Firm. He needs his coffee to get him back on time early. But we will see him soon, I'm sure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody joining us in the chat box today. Thank you so much for doing so. If you could drop a like on the video and subscribe, and also make sure you're subscribed to the Chronicles of a Gooner, which Harry, of course, presents, and 3CB Performance, which you can find the links to both channels in the description for today's video. Raj, I'm going to start with you, my friend. Edu obviously spoke very honestly and openly. Now, to provide the context for kind of what we're going to talk about today, as a fan, how do you take these interviews? Because I think this is something that isn't overly talked about. We go into the analytics and the specific words that are spoken, but there's sometimes a bit of apathy around the club when they speak to fans, and a little bit of dismissal from some sections, I suppose, of the fan base that are like, well, they're speaking to the media, they're going to say certain things, but how do you approach these conversations when you listen to them?
Well, I think twofold. One, and generally, I quite enjoyed the interview. I think it gave a lot of insight into the process that they've been looking at. And I think in this case, what I like to look at is whether it's been consistent with what they've been saying all along. And it has been consistent. He just gave more kind of detail on really the scope and what they looked at. And that's what I really appreciated in this interview from them. And like you said, I think often it's overlooked. I know the word PR has been thrown around too often, but I think it made sense because everything he said has aligned with the club's actions over the past few years. And so I really, really enjoyed the detailed level of it. And I enjoyed just how unabashed, he was very, I don't like the word abrasive, but he was matter of fact and honest about where the club was, where they are, and where they want to go. And I think that's what you need, right? Like one of my favorite sayings is the Breaking Bad saying, no half measures. And that's exactly what they've done. They've came in and they've tried to really mold the team in a certain way. And, he gave a lot more depth and insight into that. So I appreciated that honesty. And I think they're at the time now where he can do that because you're seeing the ship having turned around and starting to really go where they wanted to go. So the timing makes sense in that regard. So that timing part might be PR, but the words itself, I think, are definitely ring true because he's been consistent. Mikel's been consistent with what they want, and they've delivered it. I mean, there's still obviously a lot of work in progress, but they've laid the foundations here as well.
Harry, what do you make of that? Because, you know, as I mentioned in the original question, there is sometimes this PR spin kind of rhetoric that's thrown around a lot. Edu is not going to answer things in certain ways. You know, he's not going to turn around and go say, you know, last season was rubbish, or 2019-20 or 2020-21 was terrible. You know, they're going to focus on the positives because that's what they do, and look to build upon that. They'll accept their failures, they'll accept mistakes, and they'll try and turn things around. But, you know, I do feel that the club is, maybe from my perspective, deserving of a little bit of slack in regards to the communication, because it's something that they have tried desperately to improve upon in the last 5 years in particular.
Yeah, I think going back to what Raj said, which I think was spot on, was that if it wasn't consistent to what we'd been hearing over the last couple of seasons, I think then you have every right to question it and perhaps, you know, highlight it and maybe label it as PR spin and all of that stuff. But I think when it is consistent, then you have to kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think it has been very, very consistent. I think that Arsenal have been better at communicating with the fans, and Edu's played a massive part in this. I've got to be honest, I don't think that would be the case if it wasn't Edu in the technical director role. If it was somebody who's a little bit more of a closed book, somebody without the personality that Edu has, then perhaps we'd know much less and we wouldn't feel as comfortable taking their word as kind of gospel. But I do get the impression with Edu that he recognizes and understands and realizes the importance of giving fans something, not everything. You can't, as a football club, give them everything. You can't tell us every single thing you're doing, the details of every single process going on, every transfer dealing. You can't do that. You have to keep things under wraps when that's the right thing to do. But like, for example, in the interview today where he talks about when the process began, for example, you know, he does refer back to old stuff, and the dust has settled now, and you can talk about that stuff and shine some light on it and offer some clarity now that the time has passed. So I think that, yeah, there is an element of PR to it. There is an element of Arsenal doing this and Edu doing this because he knows for the most part it's going to go down well. But that's part and parcel of running not just a football club, but any big business. Any elite business has to do that. And I think that he's right to do it. I think the way he's done it is refreshing. It's engaging. It's encouraging. And I'm all for it. Again, tell us what you can tell us and we'll be on board. I think he says right at the start of the interview, the most important part for me is that in order to judge something, in order to, reflect on something, you need to understand it in the first place. And without these interviews, without this communication, then you can't blame us for not understanding. But it is there now. And so I think now as fans, we have to take it on board, understand it, and hold him accountable to the things he says, because we did that last season. And ultimately, most of it came to fruition. So let's give him the trust again.
Indeed. Let's talk about the actual content, within the interview. We'll start off with the openness about the Rafinha situation. I'm trying to think back to a moment where the Arsenal ownership, the executives, the manager were as open about missing a transfer target as Edu was in this moment, Raj, because, speaking specifically on the player, he says, I have a very good relationship with agents and players because it's part of my role. But when I start to talk to them, they explain to me as well, not only some ideas about Arsenal, but other clubs too. I say, be transparent to me because I can help you. What possibilities do you have? What do you want to do? I can give you information as well, but give me a little bit. For example, Rafinha was clear, and Deco is my close friend. He wants to go to Barcelona. That is his dream. So I said, thank you very much. And we moved on, and we didn't go into any kind of bidding wars with Chelsea or Barcelona because Barcelona was where he was always going to go. But what do you make of them being so open about the process behind missing out on what was one of our priority transfer targets?
To me, it shows a sense of professionalism where it's not personal, where things aren't personal. If someone says no to you, it's not a personal thing. Players, like any other human, have preferences. They want to go certain places. You understand that. And so in this case with Rafinha, that's his dream. You don't want to get in the way of that. It's not a personal thing to Arsenal, right? It's just that's how humans work. And I think I really appreciate that because it shows that they're not allowing some of those personal feelings to get in the way of their valuations of players. And I think we've seen that with Rafinha. We've seen it with Lissandro too, where we have a certain number that's based on evidence. If you don't want to come, fair enough, we move on. I think that's a great process to have. And I think him talking about, Edu talking about some of those things speaks to that just different level of understanding of players and understanding that, everyone, like you said, has certain priorities, and just be open. I think in the end, what they appreciate, like you said, and the quote says, is them just transparency, being open and honest, right? Tell us what you want. We'll tell you what we want. If it happens, great. If it doesn't, we move on. And then that's all there is to it.
Indeed. I'm very, very happy to say that our third panelist of the evening has survived the traffic and he's made it back. How you doing, FK? You good?
Mate, I'm good. Sorry, guys, for being late. The North Circular
problem.
is a killer at this time of day.
It is. I can vouch for that. It is. I've been stuck on there many a times.
Well, it's as they say, better late than never. And we're very honoured to have you on the show, mate. How you doing? Other than the traffic, are you all good?
Yeah, mate, I'm good. I was watching it while I was driving, to talk about the heat and talk about Edu's interview. So yeah, mate, I'm glad the temperature's a little bit milder. I love what Arsenal are doing in the window, and yeah, I've been good, mate. It's my last week at work, so beginning to wind down and focus on the summer.
Yeah, you've been watching, so you would have heard me ask the boys about kind of their feelings around the apathy sometimes that's around the club being communicative, and maybe the suspicion. I'm thinking back to, I don't know if you know the Futurama gif of Fry, when his eyes just get very close together because he's being suspicious. That's how sometimes I feel about when the club put out a PR, and certainly a lot of the fan base do as well. What have you made, just to get your thoughts on how open Edu has been about everything so far?
I like it. I had my reservations at first about Edu. I thought, are Arsenal just sort of ticking a box here? Former invincible, great player, loyal servant to the club. If you just, brought him in just to kind of like keep the fans happy. But I like what he said recently. I watched the Sky Sports interview this afternoon. I'm sure many of your viewers have tuned into that. And I think his words are clear. I think they're deliberate. I think he's absolutely sort of focused on what he's got to do, and there's a sense of unity. I mean, I like the phrase that he said. This is not a Mikel Arteta signing, it's not an Edu signing, it's an Arsenal signing, and there seems to be a strategy, a clear plan, and I love it. And look, there's going to be fans that don't agree. They're going to be like, he's saying all the right things, and he's playing a good PR game. But I think he comes across as really sincere, Tom. And, if we cast our minds back to year, 18 months, whatever it was, European Super League, the Cronkies haven't looked good coming out of that. But all of a sudden now, like, the noises that we're hearing are really positive. Arteta's clear with his words. Edu's clear with his words. Josh Kroenke's there wearing the Arsenal black sort of training top. He's there in all the training, in the sort of photos, and it's deliberate. And I
wouldn't want to wear that, but FK. If we're
mate,
real,
it looks sensational. It looks sensational. But no, honestly, like, just to kind of close on that, I think we're in a really good place, and it's much better than it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago. There seems to be more transparency. We seem to be really sort of joined up, and you know what? The all or nothing stuff as well has probably propelled that a little bit, just because the cameras are going to capture so much stuff. And I can't wait to see some of that stuff. So yeah, I'm all for it. And the more they engage with us, the better. The more interviews we have, the more FaceTime Arteta and Edu have with the fans. Yeah, love it, mate.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everyone has kind of polarizing views on a lot of Arsenal media. In particular, AFTV has divided a lot of people. But seeing Lee Judges interact with Edu, that kind of was a bit of a breaking ground moment from a YouTuber perspective. I say YouTuber, the most weird saying ever, but of course we all do produce plenty of content across it. It was to me strange seeing that moment, and it was great to see those walls kind of broken down in a way between kind of the more social YouTubing community and the club executives, as we saw. Lee was cheeky in asking about transfers, and you're only going to get one answer from Edu in that moment. But I thought that in itself, no matter what your views are on the individuals, on the platforms, or whatever's involved with things, that in itself, I think, showed that willingness to be more open and communicative with fans, and that I think is only a good thing. Going back into the content of the interview, Harry, on what he spoke about regarding, the Dortmund thing has taken quite a stir online. I think that's the big kind of headline that a lot of people have looked to, is that we spoke to a player. We don't know who that is. I wrote a piece about the players that we've been linked with from Dortmund in the last 3 years. They total Julian Brandt, Dan Axel Zagadou, Manuel Akanji, and Torgan Hazard have all been linked from Dortmund in the last 3 years. We don't know who it is. It's interesting that some Dortmund fans online have seemed to feel that Akanji fits the profile more, having struggled to agree a new deal with Dortmund due to potentially allegedly financial issues. But what did you make of him talking about that? You know, clearly Arsenal will only go into discussions with a player if the numbers, if the scouting, if every preparation possible matches their expectation. So clearly whoever they were talking to was of a quality and of a level that they felt was going to progress them forwards. And despite all of that evidence and all of that backing, all it took was a player to have one characteristic issue that didn't fall in line with what they were after. And that was enough for them, and Edu in particular, to say, no, sorry, don't matter how good you are, we're going to go elsewhere. What did you make of it?
I personally am not reading too much into the Dortmund thing, like as in that specific example, because I think that would have been the case with a number of players.
Of course.
That Arsenal
It doesn't matter who it was.
Yeah. And I think that what Edu was doing there was trying to demonstrate the fact that we have just as much control when going into the transfer market as, you know, the players that we're potentially trying to sign. He's trying to demonstrate the fact that Arsenal have been in positions where they could have got a deal over the line and actually felt that it wasn't the right thing, and so demonstrated their power in saying, no, actually, we don't think this is the right fit. He's trying to re-emphasize the point that it is about character. It is about so many other factors outside of your raw footballing ability as to whether or not you're a right player to bring into this project. So I thought it was good. I thought it was good that he gave that example. Maybe he shouldn't have said Dortmund because of the what follows after that. But I think that's what you get from Edu. He's an open character, and just circling back to what you were saying about him kind of interacting with AFTV, he won't like some of the comments that are made about him. He won't like some of the stuff that is said about the football club and various other people employed by the football club. And I don't even think that it's that he wants to interact with them. I think he knows that it has to be that way. He understands that the landscape in terms of fan media has dramatically changed over the last 5-6 years. And you need to a degree, appease that audience as well, if you want to keep everybody on side. And I think again, I don't think he wants to spend time talking to every single person, but I think Edu is someone who understands the value of having those relationships and what it can do in terms of reducing some of the heat towards the club in the difficult moments.
Yeah, indeed. No, well answered. I think that in particular, it is important not to read too much into who the player might have been. That is always going to be discussed. It's worth discussing because it's an interesting thing that we've gone, into a Dortmund-based player. Like, we can't even confirm it's Borussia Dortmund. He just went to Dortmund.
He went to Dortmund.
Yeah,
just quickly as well, Tom.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry, just quickly as well. With the whole the thing where he spoke to Lee Judges, like, we're both great friends with Lee Judges, right? We do loads and loads of shows with him. Lee Judges, I'm sure, won't mind me saying this. I'm pretty sure that he will now think twice about slagging off Edu because he's seen the human side to him now. And naturally, when you have that interaction and you understand someone a bit more, then you do think twice about going off a handle about them. So Lee won't mind me saying that, but I'm sure that'll be the case with Lee. I think he'll give Edu a bit more slack as a consequence of that. So that shows that move was a good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, we've all, to an extent, been critical of some of the things at the club. And when you're in that moment and you are face to face with the people that you've been so critical of behind a screen, behind a keyboard, it is very different. And I think just it's human nature to act differently in those moments sometimes. And it will affect how you speak, how you act, what questions you ask for, I would say, 99% of people. It's something that obviously I think it's important to have those discussions, to ask certain questions, but at the same time to maintain that respectfulness and professionalism, as I think Lee did in those moments, because you want to maintain that relationship. If you go in all guns blazing and asking certain questions that are a little bit uncomfortable in certain ways, it might not work out best for a relationship that you could potentially get some really good insight later on down the line. Let's continue onwards and talk about the idea of the troubles of selling players, Raj, because that this summer is of a huge challenge to Arsenal. We've got a lot of surplus players at the club. The Bernd Leno scenario, to me, is one of the most intriguing because I think you can actually kind of assess the entire confliction and contradiction of Arsenal's selling problems in one transfer. Bernd Leno has 1 year left on his contract, which is something that so many Arsenal players get down to in the last few years, as we know. He's a player whose value has diminished because of a lack of minutes, because someone else has either come into his position or, he's just chosen not to start over someone else, as in the case with Leno. He is being given offers and clubs are coming in for him at certain levels that is below the valuation of what Arsenal initially would consider him at. And Edu is faced with this catch-22 scenario of going, I've got to improve the reputation of Arsenal in terms of being a selling club so that teams don't exploit that weakness. But at the same time, I've got a player here who's on 1 year remaining on his deal. And also, I've got to try and assess whether or not the team that are trying to buy him will just walk away because there are other targets. And I've got to get money for him, because if we get to the end of the window and he's not gone, I could lose him for nothing in a year's time, and probably would do. So when he talked about the troubles that Arsenal face and the challenges that Arsenal face in trying to sell, have you grown in any way sympathetic towards our struggles in selling, or do you still feel that there is genuine criticisms to be had of what Arsenal could and should have perhaps done in this area of the market?
I think it's twofold. I'm sympathetic in some ways, in that they inherited a roster that had certainly a significant amount of bad contracts with players who are not looked upon favorably, and it becomes hard to move off those players. We've seen that in spades with this team. We've seen that with the roster turnover as well. On the other side of the coin, they did have chances to sell off, Maitland-Niles, and they didn't do so, right? So there's also chances like that as well. I think in Leno's case, I think that deal is going to happen. It's just a matter now of negotiating and getting the number to a point that they feel correct. Same thing with Bellerin as well. I think rejected a $4 million offer for him initially. So right now, to me, that sounds like negotiating process. But I think, to me, what I really liked about, the insight from Edu about how you kind of have to grow these players from a younger profile and increase their valuation and have that system in place, which isn't one that Arsenal really had in place, or not, they didn't focus on, which they are now, to me was really interesting. Whereas they were dealing with some of these players, like you said, after 26 multiple years left on their contract, diminishing value, aka Burn Leno. And how do you walk that tightrope? Of course, you want to get money back, but of course you want to get off certain players, right? And so it becomes a really interesting navigation. Of course, no process is going to be perfect in that regard, and they've certainly had misses, like I talked about. So I'm sympathetic in understanding that it's a difficult market. Also, the other thing is, post-COVID has been a completely different seller's market as well, in terms of overall interest in players. And it's not just something specific to Arsenal. It's throughout all the big six. And so it's a different market that you have to navigate now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's often something that's like, because the pandemic hit every club, it's something that I think is sometimes misrepresented of going, well, it affected everyone, so everyone should be treated the same. But it doesn't, for me. The pandemic had different impacts on different clubs depending on their situation, depending on the roster of players that they had, depending on the wage bill that they had at the time, depending on what their spending structure was at the time, depending on what competitions they were or were not in. It affected everybody differently. And whilst Arsenal aren't struggling financially at this moment in time and during the pandemic, I don't think they were particularly in comparison to, say, a lot of other clubs, despite reacting and the loan coming out and all of that stuff, as loads of other top clubs did. I think that because, as you said there, the roster of players in particular that we still had left over from a regime that Arteta wants to move on from, that has affected us the most of all. For me, this is the last summer where that, I don't like using the word excuse, because, as me and Harry talk about a lot, these are often genuine reasons as to why things happen. But for me, this is the last summer that can be used as a reason to kind of defend the management, because this summer, 3 summers, of Arteta should be used to really finalise at this stage his ultimate squad before his first ultimate squad before he moves on to trying to build on from where we are as a foundation. The last topic before I go and talk about the main headline act being the ambition that the club has, FK, is the idea around when he spoke of Mikel Arteta's contract and the decision around Arteta's contract. For me, his answer actually changed my perception and mind about how I felt at the time of its renewal. For me, I kind of was tempted to wait because it was early. Whilst I was fine with the timing of the renewal when they announced it, and because it was kind of always going to happen, it was a matter of time until it was announced. But I didn't mind it being announced early on before the season finished, because I thought it may have taken away a distraction and given the team a bit of a boost to know that. But there was always part of me that goes, if we don't get Champions League, then we have obviously missed out on what was a really good opportunity. And perhaps I do need another season to assess things before I make my own choice about whether or not I think he is the right guy to lead us into the long-term future. But at the same time, listening to what Edu said, he explained kind of very clearly the benefits of extending Arteta when we did, and the impact that would have on the window and on convincing players like we've now seen with Jesus and Zinchenko in particular to join. It's been hugely beneficial. And so from my perspective, it has changed based upon that Edu's answer. But I'm interested to know where your head was at the time of the renewal, and obviously how you feel about what Edu said in regard to it.
That's a great question, Tom. I think at the time of renewal, I kind of had an inkling that we would go with Arteta. Look, Arsenal don't make rash decisions. You know, it has to be really toxic, really bad, irreconcilable differences between the fan base and the manager and the way that the club is going for them to really part company. And I don't think we were quite near that. And if you remember, I think the Arsenal faithful going to grounds, going to games were very much behind Mikel. And that is almost like the acid test for a manager. You know, when you've got the support of your match-going faithful, that often says a lot. Timing for me, you know, it was going to happen. I think with that in mind, Arsenal were always going to extend Arteta. And I think, yeah, you're right. It sends a bit of a statement to players that might be joining the club, players that might be considering their futures within the club. You know, we've got some contracts that we have to get sorted over the next few weeks, few months. And, you know, even though we're Arsenal, even though we're London, even though we have a big pull and, you know, we're going to be here tomorrow, even if Arteta wasn't, I think players like to know who's going to be in charge and who's going to be sort of, you know, steering the ship. So I sort of saw it coming. And I have to say I was quite pleased because I like Arteta and I really want him to be successful. And there is a lot of sentimental value there because I loved him as a player. I think with Edu's comments, again, just going back to my points, like it's clear, it's deliberate. That is very much part of the strategy. They seem to be working very well together. They have a nice relationship, it looks like, from the outside looking in. And so there's nothing really more that I can sort of add to that. But I think it was the right decision by the club. I think Arteta is very much here for the long term. And, you know, football is not binary. It's not about like, you know, the results going in the right direction. Yes, then fantastic. Everything's working out really well. We knew that Arteta came into an environment, into a culture, adopted a squad that had its difficulties. And it's not just about results. Certainly in the transition phase, you know, he had to clear out a lot of the deadwood. He had to get rid of one or two toxic personalities. When your club captain is breaking rules repeatedly, you know, he's your talisman, your best paid player. You have to do something about it. And as much as some of us adore Aubameyang, it was the right thing to do. But doing that's not easy. It takes, you know, it's a brave decision. And he's made those decisions. And now we can see like the positive vibes in the squad, the way everyone's so united, the caliber of player, the profile of player that we're going for in the market. I'm really excited about it. So I think it was very much the right thing to do.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that, you know, the explanation around it and then seeing genuine evidence of two players that he's worked with that he would have had such kind of a holdover in negotiation coming into the club is just tangible evidence off the back of it, which is something that I think in the past maybe a lot of words from the club haven't necessarily come with the evidence to back it. But now we have seen here in this example in particular, you know, that tangible evidence indeed. We're going to move on to the second half of the show, which is focusing on the ambition. You know, he did an interview not just with the journalist, but also spoke to haters and Sky. And in particular, the interview with Sky, he started to be asked about Champions League as kind of the ambition, as Arsenal being always attached to this label of have to get into the top four. That's always what's talked about. Before we do, though, I do want to address a couple of things from the chat box. 939, thank you so much for the kind donation. He says, you guys left me with no choice but to donate. Harry, Tom, and FK, of course, from Latte Firm. Dream Team Business, keep up the good work, lads. A big fan, clearly, of all of your work, guys. So fantastic to see this. I love this comment as well from Drew. It's like, great to see Raj in the flesh. Hope you're doing great, mate. Huge fan of your insights on Twitter as well. You can follow Raj on Twitter at 3CB Performance as well. And Tessie says, this gets a like just for having FK. Latte at the ready, indeed. I love that. We're going to be tackling your comments in the third section of the show in 15 or so minutes time. So make sure you start to get those questions in. I'm going to start saving them and tallying them up, and we're going to tackle them as much as possible. Let me read you, Harry, the quote to kick off this discussion around ambition, just to get everybody in kind of the same context. He says, says, when he was asked about Champions League, he says here, when he points to his head, we have to, in my mind, win things. That's the most important thing for us. I think we have in our mind, we have to win and win. And the Champions League is a consequence to something, but I like to think a little bit bigger. It's a short quote, but I think it actually generates the most discussion out of everything from the interview, because after so long, Arsenal have been having this stigma of Champions League qualification is what Arsenal have to do. And I think that most of us would agree that the next step for Arsenal is, of course, getting back into the Champions League. But that is often used as a bit of a stick to beat Arsenal with, because that's always kind of perceived to be as what the end game is of the club, when we know, and hopefully they know from what we're hearing from Edu, it certainly isn't, that it's not. So what do you make of hearing Edu for... It shouldn't have been one of the first times to hear this thing said. And I suppose it's more that it hasn't, rather than it not being the ambition, it's just not something that they've said outwardly, that the ambition is well ahead of just Champions League qualification.
Well, I think this is one where in Edu's position, you've got to be quite careful. I think you want to put the message out that, you know, you're ambitious and you want to go as far as possible. If you read the quotes on The Athletic, he goes into a little bit more detail and he says, but I'm realistic. Like, I understand that there's City and there's Liverpool and it's not just that simple. But he said this is a huge club and a great club, and we have to get back to thinking that way about winning. So he does kind of add a little bit more context to it in the written interview, which I think is interesting, because you can easily take that and go, well, Edu says that Arsenal need to be winning the title, and that's what Edu wants. So if Edu doesn't succeed in that between now and his departure, then he would have failed. When actually, he's not saying it's a given. He's not saying it's a guarantee. He's saying that that's what we're aiming for. And that's what we should be aiming for. You know, there's no point in, you know, it's not going to be, let's get in the Champions League. Okay, we've done it now. Let's put our feet up and sort of sit on a beach and just get on with it. Like, there's got to be that further ambition, but we need to achieve that step first of getting back into the Champions League. And then for me, the next step after that is not even going on and winning the Premier League. It's re-establishing ourselves as Champions League regulars. And then the next step is going and winning the biggest honor. So I still think there's a couple of steps in between getting there, but it's clear that he wants to get there. The other big question is, will the owners support that? Now, I know they'll say they will, and they'll give lip service to it. And, you know, I've got to say, I've not been as anti-Kroenke as a lot of people in the last couple of years, because I do think since the kind of split ownership issue went away or was resolved, I do think that they've been better. I do think they've been more proactive. They've obviously spent money. They've paid people off, which Edu's spoken about at length as well, which again is an investment, as Edu called it, in terms of trying to get us back to where we want to be. But will they ever give us the financial backing that Edu and Arteta and everybody else needs to go to that next level? Because it's not a coincidence that Manchester City have won the league 4 of the last 5 times. You know, this Liverpool side have been superb, right, under Jurgen Klopp. They've been incredible. He's done a wonderful job. But Jurgen Klopp could quite easily leave Liverpool having won just 1 Premier League title, because he doesn't have the investment that Manchester City do. So there's a part of me that thinks, yes, if you operate in the right way, like Liverpool have, and if you do things well, you can close the gap. But is it sustainable once you get there to remain there? And I think that bit falls on the owners. If Arsenal keep doing what they're doing and show us that they're moving in the right direction, there will come a point, a crossroads point, where we'll have to look at the owners and go, okay, are you now going to pump in the money that we need to go that extra mile? So I believe that that's what Edu wants, and I'm fully on board with Edu. I think he's doing a great job. But there is that part in the back of my mind that always thinks, can we ever get there and sustain it without the ownership changing, either in terms of it being someone else or them changing their approach in terms of how they invest?
Raj, Harry's kind of broken down the context and the realism and the expectation around what we can expect from Arsenal and what we should really be looking at. But looking at it from a fan perspective, to play devil's advocate for a second, has Edu, with these comments about ambition being greater than that of the Champions League, accidentally, inadvertently, whatever word you want to use, given a bit of a rod for his own back and a little bit of a sword to fall on, if you like, if Arsenal don't even get into Champions League qualification next season? Does this add pressure? Does this add expectation? Or is the reality that most of us, all of us nearly, you know, want Arsenal to get back to the level of competing for titles and winning the biggest honours, and seeing the Arsenals of, you know, the early noughties, late 90s and the years going back through our history that made the club what it is today. Is it that expectation is always going to be there, or do you think what Edu has said now has added that pressure even more greatly?
Yeah, I don't think it really adds any pressure. I think that was the expectation for all the fans who have been, especially following this team and following this rebuild. He said from the start, 22-23 would be this season. And that was 2 or 3 years ago. He said this, where he said that would be the season where the club is really getting back to competing. So that's pressure from 2 or 3 years ago already. Now he's in a better place to say it. And I think he's really just repeating that same ambition. And the part that I really liked about it was the fact that you mentioned it, it's a consequence. And they've always talked about just focusing on the process, and the results are a byproduct of that. And they've been extremely consistent with that messaging, and they've done it throughout. And Mikel says the same thing, you know, focus on what you can control, focus on the work you put in, and the rest that comes out of it, will be the byproduct, will be the result of that. And so I think the pressure of that comment, that's already pressure that they probably feel internally more than anything. These guys are competitors themselves. They want to see the club get back to the top. You know, if you think we have ambition, like, you know, we have a certain expectation, imagine how they feel, what their own expectation is, right? And so that might be even higher than what we have. But I like the way that he's doing it in terms of still being realistic and not, you know, pie in the sky. Every club's going to have long-term goals that they have, but you also have short and medium-term goals. So you have to have a plan to get there. And I think that's what he's really speaking to, that aspect of taking steps to get back to where you want to go. You want to have a goal in mind, of course, but there are still steps you have to take to get back there in that regard. And I think to Harry's point, that's going to require, of course, some investment from KSC. I think when I look at KSC, I look at, I actually wrote a piece for Squawka on this. I look at their previous investment into their franchises, and mostly in the States, LA Rams, Colorado Avalanche, Denver Nuggets, even their lacrosse team. Once they found a young management and manager that they trusted, they went in heavy with all those teams. And so, you know, the Rams won the Super Bowl, Avalanche just won the Stanley Cup. Nuggets have been competing, and they have had some injuries, but that's been the pattern to me. But we'll see if that, of course, you know, pattern doesn't guarantee anything, but we'll see if that maintains here. The other aspect is if we're setting City as the level of investment we need, we're never going to get to that level. I mean, that's just, I don't know.
It's interesting you say that, Raj, because like when you consider the fact that Arsenal have spent more last summer than any other team, and you know this summer Arsenal are on track to do similar, especially if we invest any more. Is it about that level of spending on a consistent basis, and you kind of expecting Arsenal, and then say not this summer, but certainly the following summers, to level down the amount of spending, but still level up the quality of player that we'll go for?
I am. To me, this is a key transitional years where we're going to see a lot of spend. And I would expect from this season, you're going to see maybe key players come in, but we've seen how much, you know, City spends consistently big numbers when they need to, right? I don't know if we're ever going to see that level of consistent spend from any club outside of the cities, outside of the PSGs in general. So, but to Harry, I think there has to be some level of consistent spend for sure. That's just the game these days. And Mikel has always said from the start, man, I need quality players. That's just what it is. And so that's just part of the game.
Absolutely. Lastly, FK, regarding kind of ambition for you, a more of a personal question. If you had to lay out kind of what you think the process is, not to give you an easy question at all, but what would you label what your expectations of what, hearing from what Edu has said there, of what the process is? Because it's not just this fan created ideal, the idea of this process. It's something and a word that is used a lot by the club and the people in it. So it's not something we've made up. You know, it's something that gets referenced to within in-house a hell of a lot.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, look, the process in my mind is quite clear. We want to go from where we have been 2-3 years ago, which is loitering around sort of 7th, 8th, playing in the Europa League, flirting with the conference. And we want to get to the top of English football. It's as simple as that. You know, I'm not saying that Arsenal deserve to be there, are entitled to be there, but we want to be there. We want to be at Europe's top table. We want to be at the top of the Premier League. And I appreciate we are still miles off because City have, you know, through financial doping and stockpiling of top players, been able to build amazing success, as have Chelsea and, of course, Liverpool with some really smart acquisitions. But, of course, they were very lucky with the boom of television money, the sale of Suarez, Coutinho, and they've bought really well. But it allowed them to buy £70 million goalkeepers and £50-60 million midfielders. And we're catching up. I think, look, a league title campaign is miles off. But for me, I think Harry sort of nailed it. You know, it's not about winning the title. I think the objective has to be to finish as high as we can in the league and to win as much silverware as possible. But every year they need to look at who were champions, and they need to look at basically how do we reduce the gap between us and them. It's not about catching fourth. It's not about catching third. It's not about catching second. It's about looking at City and thinking, right, 99 points, 98 points, whatever it is. How are we going to get closer? How are we going to narrow that gap, which will, of course, then allow us to climb the league? And I think the process has been clear. Clear out the aging forces, clear out those toxic personalities, build with a youthfully exuberant sort of squad, players of a certain profile who are leaders either at their existing clubs or national teams. You know, you look at even Sambi Lokonga. The guy's not getting a game for Arsenal, but he captained Anderlecht before he came. You look at players like Cody Gakpo, who we're potentially pursuing. The guy's captaining PSV at a very young age. You know, we've got leaders all over the pitch, right? All over even our own current team. Partey, captain, vice captain of Ghana. Xhaka, captain of his national team. Zinchenko, captain of Ukraine. I mean, there are leaders all over this pitch. And I find that really interesting, the profile of player that we're going for, because collectively there will be a hunger, a desire, a professionalism about this team. And there are also players that if things don't quite go right, then you would think that there's going to be some sort of sell-on value for as and when that time comes. So what we're doing is very smart. What we're doing is very sensible. But I think the process is clear. Edu's made that clear, and I think you know, Raj touched upon it. It's about interpretation of his quotes. If people don't look behind the immediate sort of headlines and they don't think about the substance, and of course that can be misquoted, and it'll be like Edu wanted the title and Arsenal fell short. But look, we all want to win it. We all want to be there. Arteta wants to get there, but it's going to take time. It's going to take sensible build. It's going to take really good investment. I'm so happy that we're spending the money, and the headlines might all be about Arsenal spending the most, but we haven't spent the most for the longest time. In fact, we spent the least for, 10, 12, 15 years running, and this is payback, baby. So we're slowly climbing that ladder. But 3 summers on, 3 hefty windows on, and there is more to come, I'm sure. There are going to be questions asked if we don't see the progress maybe this season. So this coming season, get back into the Champions League, go on a couple of trophy runs if we can. My disappointment, sorry, Tom, going on a bit here, but my disappointment in recent seasons is the way that we've sort of thrown certain cups, to lose at Southampton 2 years ago in the FA Cup with a really poor team, to go out to Forest last season in the FA Cup. That's inexcusable to me. It doesn't matter what we're doing in the league, but Arsenal have to have a squad capable of competing for trophies like that. So going far in the Europa League this year, winning it has to be our objective. But Champions League, of course, qualification. But ultimately, we want to be back at the top of English football.
Yeah, 100%. The other thing I was just going to quickly add as well, the thing about like spending every summer, and the last couple of summers, people keep talking about how much we've spent. We're still not at the point though where we'll go and spend 60, 70 million pounds on a player. And I think that that's a point that at some point, if you want to be right at the very top, you need to get to go and get those absolutely elite players. We're kind of banking on building them up at the moment and hoping that the collective will see us close the gap. But I think, there will come a time, hopefully, if this process is carried out properly, where we go into a summer and we need 2 players or 3 players instead of 6s and 7s, and then you can afford to invest more money. So I think that's I think that thing about Arsenal spending more than everyone the last couple of summers is a bit of a misconception when you look at how many players we've bought in for that money. Actually, it's not that big a deal. I think last summer I worked it out, and I think the average was about 26 million per player across all the players that we brought in. So it's really not Man City levels, even Liverpool levels this summer with Darwin Núñez, for example. So that's the next point that you'd hope that we'll get to.
And you do, sorry, Tom, you do get to a point, Harry, where even the players that maybe aren't playing regularly get to a point where there is a premium where we can sell them on for. So,
Yeah.
you know, you might come. I mean, Manchester City, great example. They've sold Zinchenko and Jesus, who've been really good players for them, and they've sold them for a lot of money, which has allowed them to go and buy other players. And we just need to get there, and that's pretty much the strategy that I think we're trying to adopt.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I'm glad you jumped in, FK, actually, because whilst you were talking, just getting up kind of the history of Manchester City's spending, you know, whilst 150 million in a season is our record, you know, you go back through their summers and there are summers where they've spent 285 million in one year, in one calendar year, with the summer and January of Aymeric Laporte, Benjamin Mendy, Kyle Walker, Bernardo Silva, Ederson, Danilo, Douglas Luiz, all coming in you know, the space of a summer, and with Laporte, the January window as well. If you look at Chelsea, you know, Chelsea spent 222 in the summer of 2020 and through to 2021. They spent 187 in the summer of 2018. They spent 234 in the summer of 2017
Tom,
through to January as well.
Chelsea spent £50 million on Shevchenko almost 20 years ago. 20 years. It took us, you know, well, Pepe, 72 million, 2-3 years ago, and that's a one-off. So these clubs have been doing it for a long time, and it's allowed Chelsea to stockpile lots of players. They've got you know, 30, 40 odd players on loan that they can just sell at a whim. City and Liverpool have been able to sell players based on the premium that they're successful teams. You know, Ryan Brewster, 25 million. Dominic Solanke, 20 odd million. Michael Edwards was a genius, but that comes with the premium of being a successful team. So we're getting there. We just need to just be a little bit more patient. I know people are really sick and tired of hearing that, but with every change in manager, every change in process, you have to appreciate that. It's not going to happen overnight.
Indeed. Rahul, thank you for the donation, says, go the Dortmund way, baby. Stealing your word there, FK. But, you know, I think that the Dortmund way is a step slightly below of what we should be aiming at. You know, I get what you're saying with the Dortmund model, but in the Premier League and with Arsenal and the ambitions we have, I think it's a level above that Arsenal should probably be looking to. But I think there are benefits of the Dortmund model that certainly fit in with what Arsenal are doing with, you know, investing in youth and hoping that they become something. Okay, we're going to move into the final part of today's show for the last 12 or so minutes of the episodes, and we're going to take your questions from the chat box. Of course, we're going to try and get through as many of these as we can, lads. So if we can keep our answers as less Drew-like, if for anyone that tunes into our regular shows know how long Drew can go on with some of his answers, that would be great. And I am happy to say that Drew should be back on the channel on Sunday, which is going to be fantastic. I'm going to ask you all a slightly amenable version of this question. Paul James says, if this is a 5-year plan, when do you expect to see a return on the recent investments? Now, I think that we can all agree that Arsenal have been spending to a level, despite Harry's very true theory around the average spending on each player, but it's of a level that you would expect to see the likes of City and Liverpool spend at times. And I think that if we're going to see a plan to see Arsenal get to the title challenging level, I'm kind of curious under the current regime, what season you think is a fair expectation for Arsenal to quote unquote challenge. So it's a little bit of a tricky and out there question for you, but I want a year season. So, you know, 23, 24, 24, 25, whatever you like. I'm vamping a little bit to give you a little bit of thinking time. And we're going to go in reverse order because I'm mean. And FK, we're going to go to you first. What do you think is a fair season to say that Arsenal in this season should challenge?
Title challenge, I think a couple of years away. Harry nailed it earlier by saying, look, we need to qualify for Champions League, more revenue, more building, more scope to sign better players. But Paul James's excellent question, in terms of return on recent investment, there's no reason why we can't be picking up silverware now. So I would expect 22-23 to be that. We need to get to Wembley. We need to get to wherever the Europa League final is and be in that fight. So, yeah, a return on silverware now, but league campaign a couple of years away.
Raj?
Yeah, I agree. In terms of league campaign, I would think 3 years from now, just because of how City and Liverpool are investing as well. I mean, we've seen how Liverpool have revamped their front line already. City is always going to be revamping. So in terms of true title challenge, I would think, to me, about 2-3 years away. In terms of, ROI, I agree with FK in terms of not just winning silverware, but also it's also about Champions League financial getting in there too, right? So in terms of investment as well, that's a big one. I think that sets up Harry's point next summer of being able to add that 1 or 2 big signings every year. The way I see it, we're building the house right now. And, we're building the foundation, you're building the first floor. Now you want to add that home theater system, right? That's what next summer is for.
Absolutely. So I was distracted by a Schrodinger's cat
Same.
flaps 30-35 prediction. I love the pessimism. Harry.
Yeah, I'd say a title challenge is probably at minimum still 3 years away for me. I still think there's a lot of work to be done. I think FK's point about silverware is key. I think we need to get the likes of Bukayo Saka, Emile Smith-Rowe, Martinelli, all those young players. I think we need to give them the experience of winning silverware, because in a lot of instances that can be what spurs you on to want to achieve more. Getting a taste of something can make you more hungry for it. So I think that's important. And I think, yes, while I'd love to see us go out and win FA Cups, and I think the Europa League has got to be a real aim next season. I really do. I mean, we've been to the semi-final, 3 times in the years we've participated in it. So we've got to be looking to win that competition. But I think as well, there's a balance to be found here, because for me, if Arsenal were to finish 3rd in the Premier League, let's just say, I know that's a big ask, but if they were to finish 3rd in the Premier League, that would be, to me, a greater show of strength than winning the Europa League. And that might not make sense because you want Arsenal to win silverware, obviously, but I think your league campaign is probably the most indicative of how good you are as a side. And I think, so what I'm trying to say is that if we do show progress in the league, but the silverware still evades us because we've lost a one-off game, we've not been up for it on the occasion, then I would say that I would still not say that that's a failure, because the league will give me the best indication. But obviously silverware is massive. It's about building that winning mentality. It's about getting everybody within the club to create that extra hunger to go on for more. So I agree, it's really, really important, but it's not going to be the sole basis of my judgment on whether the team's moving forward or not if we continue to show progress in the league.
Harry caveat Symeou there for you. Lovely, lovely stuff.
Can I add one thing to what Harry said?
You can, mate.
Just to tie back into the Edu quotes about having that killer mentality, what Harry said about when you have players who won that cup, or they've had success, that's what can help build that killer mentality. Of course, now aided by the likes of adding to Zinchenko, adding to Jesus, right? So that psychological aspect, is so big. So going out and winning even these cups we've thrown away, like FK said, the FA Cup in previous years, just going out and giving them that experience, that taste for winning, and giving that confidence, that mentality boost. When you're in a game that's 1-1 on the road on a Monday night, which we were terrible at last season, right? These players playing with confidence, and instead of being hesitant, they're now playing on the front foot. That can decide over the margins of a season who finishes, the difference between 3rd and 4th, 2nd and 3rd, or in cup games. So that's massive to me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ali, for the super chat. Big up, lads. Happy with the transfer window so far, but still waiting for that big signing. I still think these comments like this, and I'm very appreciative for your donation, Ali, but I still feel like these comments sometimes are, what do people think Gabriel Jesus was not? Like, I think he's a massive signing, like absolutely massive. I was listening to my good friend Shaheen and Lev over on the Arsenal Lounge, and Shaheen was saying how, he gave the window a 5 out of 10 so far. And I was like, what? Come on. What are these expectations? They're crazy. Let's go to FK for this question from Kyle, and thank you for the donation. He says, if we win the league this year, would it be more or less shocking than when Leicester won it, given Liverpool and City in the running in the context of where they're at?
More
Are we
or less
5,000 to 1, FK?
Mate, I'll be honest with you. Leicester winning the Premier League was just ridiculous. Even though City and Liverpool weren't the forces that they are today, for Leicester to win that league was just outrageous. And I think that will always be the most ridiculous feat. I mean, it'd be a shock if Arsenal won the league, of course, this season, because City and Liverpool are just so strong for all the reasons that we mentioned, Kyle. But I don't think anything's ever going to pip Leicester. That year was extraordinary. I mean, it was just, everything just worked out for them. Ranieri had them playing just bonkers. I can't get over it. And I'm a little bit bitter about it, of course, because it should have been us. But yeah, Leicester winning that league is just something that's never, ever going to happen again. And I think that was more shocking than Arsenal winning the league this year, which would also be a shock.
Indeed. Harvey, just to tackle your question quickly, according to Sam Dean of The Telegraph, Arsenal are very close to agreeing an 8 million fee with Fulham for Bernd Leno. 8 million for a player, 1 year left on his contract. I think he's worth a bit more than that, but it might be to the stage where we kind of have to take what we can at the moment, alluding to what we discussed, of course, earlier on in the show. Let's go to Raj with Kasim's question. Biased hat off, who's had the best window so far? It's a pretty on the spot question, but we've seen Chelsea add Sterling and Koulibaly. We've seen Spurs add a lot of players. We've seen Chelsea try and sign players and have Barcelona laugh at them quite enjoyably. Manchester City have added Erling Haaland. Leeds have added a lot of Red Bull Salzburg and Leipzig players. What do you make of who has had the best window so far?
I mean, to me, it's Barcelona, considering we came into the window thinking they had no money. And so now it's like, they're like that. They're like the Donald Duck gif where, in the money and the levers, all that stuff. So to me, they've had an incredible window considering, and it really shows the power of their brand. Somewhere that, I think Arsenal really want to get back to, being able to leverage players. And I think we've seen it with certain players, but Barcelona's pull has been a little bit different. I think their window's been great. I have to shout out City because they got Haaland for what was your release clause?
67, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, to me, for a team who's already has all their foundations in place, you get a player like him in the position they've been missing the most at that valuation. I mean, that's just that's pretty incredible to me. So I'd have to go Barcelona 1, just City 2. I mean, I think Arsenal, I would put Arsenal right there at 3, just because of the positional players we've added and the depth we've added and the type of profile we've added. It's been so consistent. And I think we saw it in the preseason, the versatility of these guys and how they fit. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be great to watch with how Mikel wants to watch. He wants those Swiss Army knife players. So I've really been enjoying that window in terms of the type of player that we've got. So.
Yeah, Tio Pes agreeing you there, saying Barcelona a very good shout indeed with who they've managed to get. Interesting, there was a comment for West Ham as well. I mean, if they get Scamacca and Kostic, that's 2 very, very good signings for the club. Scamacca looks effectively done. Kostic pinging balls into the box for him is going to be a scary prospect next season, especially with Jared Bowen in the fold as well. Quite nicely, I'm glad you mentioned Haaland because it segues really well to Harry, which is our final question from Rancid Pumpkin, who says, at which point do you expect Arsenal to go for the Haalands of this world? Which I think is a really good question because you've talked a second ago, Harry, about, spreading the cost across lots of signings. But there comes a point where Arsenal will have their squads and they will then look to 1 or 2 players a summer, like City do, to then upgrade it.
Well, yeah, I think that Arsenal, if they go get another 2 players before the window shuts, which I don't think is going to be the case, by the way, I predicted that we'd bring in 2 pre-Zinchenko. So I think there'll probably be 1 more. But if we could get 2 more in, then you'd feel like we're in the place where we've pretty much got our squad together. And now it's about 1 or 2 additions each summer and making sure that they're the right additions and going to that next level in terms of what we're spending on individuals. So I don't actually think we're a million miles away from this. But it's not just about the financials here, though, is it? It's about convincing those players and being able to hold yourself up against the likes of Manchester City in terms of what you can offer them in terms of trophies and competing at the very top. And that needs to be done on the pitch. So I don't think financially we're in a million miles away from that. I just think it's about now breeding that success on the pitch that backs up and prompts up and supports what we can do financially. And then we can offer the whole package to be able to go out and get the likes of Haaland and other players of his like. But, financially, we're not a million miles away. It's just about now going that next step on the pitch to show that, or to just further cement that the process is working and that we are moving forward.
Indeed. I think what's telling as well is that Arsenal right now are actually trying to do it already. I think we saw them try it with Dusan Vlahovic. I think we saw them try it the season before with Manuel Locatelli. These are level of players that if we add them, upgrade the area that they join significantly. They weren't successful because they couldn't offer them what Juventus could offer them in those instances. But when Arsenal can offer that and more, and I think being a Premier League side, certainly when you get into the Champions League, you can start out competing a team like Juventus for certain players, even ones within Serie A, I think it's possible. It's still a challenge because especially in Italy, because they like to stay in Italy, but I think it's very, very possible indeed. We'll finish the show with a final super chat from one of our very loyal listeners, František, who says, we should focus on gaining points after 38 games, not mainly on positions. We ended with 69 last season, and we all know we threw some very winnable ones. 80 to 85 points minimum. That should be our focus. I think the minimum expectation is to win the next game for us, and that is Crystal Palace before or after the pre-season match against Sevilla. But that Crystal Palace game is going to be huge, and I look forward to bringing you content all the way up to it, on it, and after it. I'm massively thankful for the massive guests that we've had come on today's show. It's been brilliant to speak to them and to get their thoughts. Harry, thank you so much for your time. Tell people where they can find you and what you're going to be up to.
Thank you as always, mate. You can follow me on the Chronicles of a Gooner, or you can just follow me on Twitter at Harry Symeou, where you can see all the random things I get up to. So yeah, thanks for having me, Tom. Always appreciate it, mate.
Pleasure. Link in the description to Harry's channel as always. Raj, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to have a chat with you outside of the world of injuries and just about the love of Arsenal. It was a pleasure. But tell people where they can find you and what you're going to be up to.
Yeah, it was quite nice, mate. So appreciate the invite. You can find me at 3CB Performance, Twitter, YouTube. Love the interaction. So I appreciate everyone who takes the time to do that.
And last by no means least, and certainly late, FK, thank you so much for your time and coming onto the show and rushing back through the North Circular's legendary traffic jams. Tell people what you're going to be up to and where they can find you.
Sorry. Thanks again for having me, Tom. Really enjoyed
Pleasure.
it, and sorry for being late. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter. My podcast or my channel is Latte Firm. Get on there, throw abuse at me, compliment me, do whatever you need to do. But I just love engaging with me. So join me on there.
Absolutely. The links to everybody's channels is in the video description down below. So make sure that you are subscribed. That's the only way you can actually click off the video. So if you want to carry on with your life, you need to make sure you're subscribed to the other channels. That's how things work. I'm not lying, I promise. Thank you for tuning in. If you could drop a like on our video as well, would really appreciate that. I'll be back with you bright and early tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to bring you all the latest Arsenal news and updates. I'm also hopefully planning on having a chat with Dan Potts tomorrow at some point as well, which should be an interesting contrast perhaps to some of the views that we've seen today, but that should be really interesting also. But thank you for tuning in. Most importantly to you, listener, you've been great, as has the live chat box. If you've joined us late and I want to catch up, do leave a comment down below as well. We'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.